All right, so welcome to we will be discussing TARDIS, time and remnants decay in SRAM to implement secure protocols on embedded devices without clocks. Notably, this is not my paper, I am just giving a summary of it. So just a quick agenda for what we'll be discussing and what you can expect throughout this presentation. The first thing we will do is we will just do a little paper introduction. Then we will do some background information, what you'll need to know before we discuss the paper. Then we'll also go in depth of SRAM, which is also very important to the paper. We will then discuss the implementation of TARDIS, the results, and then end with a summary. Right, so the introduction. Currently, batteries are used to power clocks that computers rely on, and batteryless embedded devices do not have a battery, so they cannot maintain a clock and thus cannot calculate the passing of time. And this unawareness is a problem because it has left contactless payment cards and other devices vulnerable to attacks such as side channel attacks, replay attacks, and brute force attacks. All right, so just kind of a diagram of some practical attacks that have occurred in the real world. They have been conducted and are successful against, the different types of platforms, or which are batteryless devices. Again, a lot of these are due to the fact that an adversary could query the device as many times as required for attack because the device did not have a sense of how long had passed between those requests. And you can kind of see that in the queries side of the chart. So this goes to show the variety of ways that these devices can be attacked, and also provides motivation to continue to research batteryless devices and the security of them. And so the TARDIS paper does exactly that. It builds upon research, and it proposes that many of these attacks can be mitigated if there is a way to keep track of time. All right, so just a brief overview of the paper. As we said, TARDIS is the proposed solution to many of the vulnerabilities that you saw on the previous slide. It uses time and remnants decay in SRAM to track time passing without a power source and without any additional circuitry. So you can see that TARDIS is broken up into 3 different stages. The first stage is power up. This initializes a region in SRAM of an intermittently powered device. Then on power down, SRAM will start to decay. And then on the next power up, TARDIS measures the function of SRAM cells that lost their state. And then time can be calculated from that fraction or ratio of cells that have lost their state or not. All right, so a little bit of background. Intermittent computing is where a device has periods of off and periods of on time before a task is completed. So in general, intermittent computing is used for batteryless devices because they rely on harvested energy or energy gained from external sources. And energy from external sources cannot always be reliable, so therefore you have to use intermittent computing. So some examples of these devices are, smart cards and RFID tags, and some of the characteristics that these devices have are their limited computational power, the fact that they rely on wireless transmission from a reader for energy and timing information, and also they lose power frequency due to minimal energy storage. Then, just kind of as an example, if you use a smart card to tap into a subway station, the card reader provides the energy to the card, Once the card performs the task, it can be removed from the reader, and when the card is removed from the reader, the card is no longer powered, and thus, without power, the card cannot, compute time. It loses all sense of time. All right, so SRAM. An SRAM cell is made up of two PMOS transistors and two NMOS transistors, which control the on or off state of the cell. In normal conditions, SRAM will be either 1 or 0 at any given moment. And when a device is not powered, SRAM has a preferred state that can be either 0 or 1. So SRAM will decay back to its preferred state when a device is turned off and left to sit. So if SRAM has a preferred state of 0 and the cell ends up being 1 when the device is turned off, it will decay back to 0. If the preferred state is 1 and the cell is 0 when the device gets turned off, it will decay back to 1. So TARDIS uses this fact to calculate time passing. However, due to the overhead of calculating, setting, and storing each cell's preferred state, they decide to call 0 the preferred state for simplicity, and this will be relevant later. So before implementing and evaluating the TARDIS code that we will talk about later, the researchers had to understand the behavior of the SRAM cells under different conditions. So after a bunch of testing, they determined that voltage is what affects memory decay, and the other factors affect the rate of voltage depletion, so essentially having a second-hand effect in memory decay. So in the left graph, you can see that no matter what the temperature is, the amount of decay mostly depends on the minimum supply voltage reached when the device powers down. And then on the right graph, you can see that the probability that a randomly chosen cell will not have decayed based on the minimum supply voltage reached when the device powers down. And then these are some of the secondhand effects that I was discussing, or I mentioned a little earlier. So the first one is size. It has an inverse relationship. The larger SRAM has, or the larger SRAM is, the larger the leakage current will be, and thus will drain the capacitor faster and SRAM faster. Capacitance, it has a direct relationship. The higher capacitance can increase resolution time, and resolution time is the time to completely deplete SRAM. And this is due to the capacitor's ability to maintain voltage. Chip variation is negligible. Durations of different stages of decay match closely across the different types of chips, despite those may be happening at different times. And then temperature, has an inverse relationship with SRAM. There's a lower temperature can increase the remanence, which is the retention of SRAM cell states, and then inversely, a higher temperature will decrease the remanence. So now on to the implementation of TARDIS. So TARDIS is implemented via code. First, there are kind of 4 different major code sections. First is the init function. This is called on power-up. It sets the region of SRAM cells to completely 1, and as we mentioned earlier, SRAM will the researchers assumes that SRAM's preferred state is 0. So that's why we're setting all the cells to 1. Additionally, the temperature is measured to compensate for possible temperature changes that might affect the decay rate later on. At this point, the device can resume normal activity and then can be powered off. Then, on the next power-up, time is called. Time calls decay, which calculates and returns the number of zeroed cells in the SRAM region, or an error depending on if the temperature fluctuations were expected or unexpected. Time then calls an estimate function, which calculates the time that has passed with decay and the temperature as parameters based off of a pre-compiled lookup table. Finally, expired is an additional method that is provided. It is used to check if SRAM has fully decayed. It can be used for extending the time the device is calculating. So if if the SRAM has decayed, it will it will be reinitialized with the init function, and the counter will be adjusted to keep track of the number of expired cycles. So, for example, say you want the device to do something after 45 seconds, but SRAM depletes after 15 seconds. So after SRAM depletes at 15 seconds, you can call init again, and it will reset all the cells back to 1. Then another counter is then updated to account for the number of depletion cycles that have passed, and then after 30 seconds, SRAM will have depleted again, and it is called again to reset the cells, and the counter is again updated. After the third depletion, time is up, and the device will then perform the assigned task. All right, so the researchers have found 6 security protocols that could be strengthened against brute force attacks by using TARDIS. Those 6 are sleepy RFID tags, squealing credit cards, forgiving e-passports, passback double tap prevention, resurrecting duckling, and timeout in authentication protocols. All right, so we'll discuss the first security protocol, which is sleepy RFID tags. So when you buy a device, typically something like a smart home device, maybe fridges, washing machines, who knows, they come with RFID tags, and you can disable the tag or deactivate the tag using a kill command. However, this reduces the functionality of a device, so your smart device might not be able to communicate with other smart devices. And more importantly, it is also permanent, so it cannot be undone. So TARDIS allows for a sleep state alternative. So this is done by specifying the amount of time that the device should sleep. The device then loops through an appropriate amount of depletion cycles, which are cycles where SRAM is initialized and then allowed to decay all the way, to reach the desired amount of time. The device can then respond to the request sent by a reader. So if you look at the image, your device is connected and able to communicate with the RFID tag. And then say you want it to go to sleep, you tell it to go to sleep, and that purple line indicates that it will be sleeping for that amount of time. Any requests by a reader or another device can be received, but it will not be responded to during that sleep period. Once that sleep period finishes, the tag and the readers or other devices can then communicate again. All right, so the second security protocol is squealing credit cards. So squealing credit cards cannot tell the elapsed time between 2 reads, as a card is only powered on when it communicates with a reader. Consumers cannot know if their card has been used more than once in a short period of time, unless they receive a receipt or something like that. So TARDIS can be used to enable a time lock after the first read to prevent additional reads in a specified amount of time. So credit cards can be made to audibly warn a user should a second read attempt be attempted if TARDIS is used on that card. So as you can see in the picture, the reader implements a valid request to the tag or the card, and then since that request was valid, the card then is time locked, so maybe for a minute. Within that minute, any other read requests or will not be accepted by the card. And if, a second read request is made, the card will make some sort of audible chime or something like that to allow a user to know that, hey, there was a malicious attempt on the card. All right, the third security protocol is for giving e-passports. So e-passports contain a lot of sensitive data or personal data. So this could be name, date of birth, biometrics, etc. The e-passports are protected by a basic access control protocol used to protect them, but that protocol can be brute forced due to not having proper throttling. So TARDIS can provide throttling of unauthorized requests so that malicious queries can be or cannot be made as quickly. TARDIS also allows for resetting the throttle if the passport is removed from the reader's range, allowing the user to use their card at the next reader without any delay. So as you can see in the picture in front of you, the reader is sending a lot of requests to the card, and the card is responding to all of them. This is kind of prominent of a brute force attack. And so if, say 3, 4, maybe more, whatever you want to set the limit to, that many requests happen in a certain amount of time, you can start throttling your responses. So, you might respond in a tenth of a second, but now you're going to respond after 1 second. And with TARDIS, it can then, if you remove your card from this reader and this reader's area and you go to another reader, you will not be hindered by the throttling response again, or by the throttling, you will be able to use your card at the 0.1 second response rate that it was before. So the fourth security protocol is passback double tap prevention. In mass transit, operators need to prevent multiple people from accessing the system simultaneously with the same card. Currently, the systems are connected to a central database that prevents cards from being used twice in a short time frame. So TARDIS allows a card to implement a delay before a re-entry is made, reducing the need for a centralized system. So as you can see in the picture, a valid entry is made, and then a timeout is or a time lock is implemented. So any additional re-entries made attempted during that lock are invalid, and then or won't be sent. And then once that time lock expires, you can make a valid re-entry. All right, the fifth security protocol is resurrecting duckling. So ad hoc wireless devices have low computing power and scarce energy resources, and these devices can be transferred between owners. So TARDIS can provide a way to transfer the device by providing a sense of time. So a legitimate user can use a device wirelessly if they continue to provide power to it. If the device is powered down for a specified amount of time, ownership can be transferred to another person. And if the device is not powered down for long enough, it will not be reset and will refuse to interact with anyone that does not have, the correct crypto key. Another use for it is if a device is powered down for too long, your card can refuse to boot. So this might prevent SIM card theft or something like that. So in the picture, you can see the card is connected to device 1. After a short power off, the device is still connected to, or the card is still connected to device 1 and cannot be connected to device 2. After a long power off, the card can then be connected to device 2. All right. The sixth security protocol is timeout and authentication protocols. So here, RFID tags rely on the reader as their source of energy. So tags cannot measure the delay between a request to the reader and the reader's response due to not being powered the entire time. So TARDIS provides a time reference on the card which can be used to employ bounds in which a response can be received. So this effectively reduces the time an adversary has to attack. So if you look at the picture, the reader sends a request, the card sends a challenge, and if the card does not receive a response to that challenge within an appropriate amount of time, then the response is ignored. Or yes. All right, so results. So after implementing TARDIS, the researchers identified and discussed security measures. So TARDIS is vulnerable to the same things SRAM are. This is because TARDIS is built upon SRAM. Thus, adversaries may try to use those vulnerabilities against TARDIS to slow down or speed up the expiration of time. This throws off time calculations for the benefit of the attacker. So cooling attacks and heating attacks, adversaries might try to raise or lower the temperature of the board to quicken or slow decay of SRAM. And then in the decay method of the code, TARDIS actually specifically checks for temperature fluctuations. If TARDIS will catch these measure or temperature spikes, it will return an error indicating that time is not to be trusted. So pulse attacks is another type of attack. Adversaries might try to combine cooling and heating attacks to modify decay. These are difficult to implement as they specifically attempt to restore the original internal temperatures to avoid detection. So the researchers have mentioned that thermal fuses can be implemented in conjunction with TARDIS to identify temperature tampering. Finally, you have voltage control attacks. Adversaries could supply enough voltage to stop memory decay, but not turn the device on. So this would effectively freeze the TARDIS timer and mess up the final timing calculations. Uh, so, but it's most likely very difficult to implement as devices are sensitive to several factors. Additionally, it is not inherent for readers to control voltage that precisely. Rather, they just kind of flooded an area with energy. Um, yeah. And so then we will discuss TARDIS performance. So it can be summed up in resource consumption and resolution times. So resource consumption was computed with a Mu RFID sensor tag, which was the same device used for SRAM experiments and TARDIS implementation. Notably, Init and Decay were reported to be the most energy consuming for the procedures, and in total, they consume about 50 microjoules and over about 15 milliseconds. Resolution times, or the times to deplete, was another or a metric used to evaluate TARDIS. As previously mentioned, increased capacitance increases SRAM state retention and thus resolution time. On the bottom, you can see the exact capacitor sizes tested and the decay times measured. Something to note, stage 1 is the time before the first SRAM cell decays, and stage 2 is the time between the decay of the first SRAM cell and the last SRAM cell. All right, so just a summary of what we've discussed. To recap, TARDIS aims to solve the issue that batteryless embedded systems are susceptible to a wide range of attacks due to the lack of an onboard clock, and thus there's no way to keep track of time. So as discussed in this presentation, TARDIS utilizes the decay of SRAM to calculate the time that's passed. It has taken this solution and implemented 6 different security protocols for various use cases of batteryless embedded devices. And then the image on the bottom is just a visual representation of the effects of SRAM data decay over time. All right, that concludes the presentation. Thank you for watching.